There's nothing that God can't redeem, and he's a God of restoration. He's done it in my life, and he'll do it in your life too.
You shall live and not die. I speak a word of faith, let me prophesy. I speak a word of faith, let me prophesy. With long life will your days be multiplied.
You will live and not die and declare the mighty works of the Lord. Welcome to Set Free Podcast. I'm Abel Malone.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ryan Orban, and we're here today, man. This is our second time coming to you. Abel and I, we both run ministries that help men become set free through the bondages of addiction. Both of us have similar stories and backgrounds. Yeah. And we want to bring you messages of hope from friends of ours that have gone through similar instances, and God has been faithful to them and pulled them out of pits and dark places. And today it's my honor. At the Manna House, I have a guy that's been with me since I've been leading over there a little bit over a year. He came about the same time, and he's currently our operations director. And I wanted him to come today and share his story. And I just want to introduce you, Jeremiah Campbell. Jeremiah, what's up, bud?
Hey, guys. How are y'all?
Hey.
Doing well.
Doing well. So, basically, we just want to get into a little bit of your story. And, currently, again, you're our operations director at the Manna House, and it's been great to have you on board. But want to get a little bit into your backstory. So, man, how'd you grow up? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I appreciate you guys having me here. Yes, sir. Well, yeah, and I grew up with what I thought was a pretty normal childhood. Had a dad that was a shift worker, so he worked and slept, which is pretty much what shift workers did. Had a mom who was a stay-at-home mom, but ran a in-home daycare. So as you can imagine, the house was never quiet. So for a guy who was working shift work and having to work at night and sleep during the day, he was a pretty patient man, I would have to say. And so had a pretty good dad for the most part, but he worked and that's what he did. And then, like I said, my mom did childcare, so there was always something going on at my house. You know, our place was kind of the landing pad for the neighborhood, what I like to call affectionately the strays. We had, just the kids that didn't really have a lot of parents present, kids that just never seemed to go home. They just made their way to my house, and so that was just normal for me. That's just how I grew up, and it was a pretty neat childhood to just constantly have somebody to play with. Constantly have friends, and so it was a pretty neat way to grow up.
How about schooling? How did you do in school?
As far as school and just, again, a normal childhood, very athletic. Athletics was a huge part of my life. I was a competitive athlete from kindergarten all the way up to the end of high school. We had Jesse Owen summer program, so I was running competitive track and cross country since I was about 5 years old. High school coach vetted me from all the way back there. He was the one running this program. This guy stayed with me all the way from kindergarten to my senior year of high school, and then into a scholarship that I had received. And so school was great. I was a fairly good student. Always wanted to perform well, academically and athletically, which I think is what helped me out, at least through high school. And just kind of help me maintain a normal life and a balance in that life. Yeah.
How was your your relationship with God during that time? Did you go to church? Were y'all involved?
No, so I had and this is not a denomination bashing or anything like that, but I had a pretty mixed up relationship with God when I was young. My mother was from the North, and so she was a staunch Catholic. My dad was from the South, and so he was a Southern Baptist. She was on the mission field, came down. That's how they met. And naturally, that's oil and water to some degree, the Catholics and the Baptists. And so we tried to go to a few different churches when I was young. Went to a Catholic church for a few years, and then it just kind of dissolved, They couldn't see eye to eye on where to go to church, and they just stopped going altogether. And so I knew of God, and I had some encounters when I was really young. I remember distinctly when I was 8 years old, and I had one of those existential moments, that you kind of have where everything kind of goes away around you, and you're kind of looking up, and you're looking in the sky, and you're seeing everything around you. It's kind of a Romans 1, 18, 19, and 20 moment where you're just there with creation, and I knew that there was something bigger than me at that moment. I mean, I knew there was something out there, and it was more than just what I'd experienced up to that point. but I'm an 8-year-old riding my bike down Catlett Lane in LaPorte, Texas, not really understanding what I had just experienced. But I know now as an adult that was God kind of drawing me in from a very early age. But I had nobody to really cultivate that at that age. And it wasn't until I was 26 that I really had a true experience with God, that I can look back on that experience on that day and see the first real experience I had where I knew God was drawing me in.
So LaPorte, Texas. I know I got a lot of friends on my Facebook feed from LaPorte. So LaPorte, what's up? Once you went there, you went to LaPorte High School, I'm assuming. What did it look like there? High school years. I heard you played sports. Did you start partying, using? When did that all kind of come into play?
Yeah, it was directly related to sports, but not the sport that you would think being here in Texas. It was really weird. At the late 80s and early 90s, there was this weird surgence of hockey here in Texas. We had a AHL team. The Arrows were here. Yeah. Hockey was a big thing. We had Junior Olympics were coming around, and so I got into hockey at a young age. And now I was still doing my other sports. I'd played soccer, football, still running competitive track, did some basketball. But I got into hockey really solid, and I was good. And so I got in with some older guys that were already had been playing for a while, but I was good enough to start playing with those guys at 12 years old. So I started hanging out with guys that were 15, 16 years old, already driving, already partying a little bit, and I'm a 12-year-old that's just kind of a tag-along that just happened to be good enough to be hanging out with them. So my first experience with alcohol was much like a lot of people. It wasn't a response to some major trauma in my life or something that happened, a means of self-medicating. It was socialization, man. Yeah. It was a bunch of guys. We had a sleepover one night, and they said, "Hey, man, have you ever tried tequila?" I didn't start with like Boone's Farm or something like that. It wasn't.
Jump right in.
Yeah, it was like, here's some tequila, man. And I mean, admittedly, I had fun, man.
Yeah.
So it started out just innocently enough, just a means to hang out and just socialize with friends.
But getting into your story, so you start drinking regularly. And you go on to college, or what do you do after high school?
Yeah, so as I was saying, so academically and athletically, I really wanted to perform well. And so I think for me, that was the only thing that stabilized my drinking up through high school. Like I said, I started at 12 years old. So naturally, something like that left unchecked can get out of control pretty fast. But my desire to do well athletically and academically, I think stabilized me to the point where I was drinking on the weekends, but it never became something that was noticeably out of control. My parents, it wasn't on their radar at all, not until I got into high school. And then there was some pretty major parties, some nights I'm coming home either way too late or extremely inebriated to where you can't hide it from your mom when you're trying to climb up the stairs, something like that. But yeah, so held everything together fairly well through high school. Man, I had a great time in high school. As I said earlier, I got a scholarship to Georgetown, a full ride for track and cross country. I finally kind of narrowed down all of my athletic, participation to just the one thing that I knew I could probably get a scholarship, because I'd been vetted from, kindergarten by this guy. He, put a lot of time and energy into my training and recognized something in me early, and I did. I got a scholarship.
Yeah. Georgetown in D.C.? I knew you knew those big words for a reason, man. Jeremiah, I tease him, man. He always be dropping the big words. Yeah. I'm like, man, those are Jeremiah words, and I knew it was for a reason, man.
Yeah. But, when I got that letter and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, talk to guidance counselors, you kind of go and talk to a few people that are your mentors at the time. I just kind of had a moment where I freaked out, and I decided I didn't want to run anymore. I don't want to be competitive anymore. I've been doing it since kindergarten. I'm just sick of it. I'm sick of having to try to perform for everyone else. Yeah. And I did the worst thing that you could do, and I turned down this full ride to a really great university. And I decided to go and enter into a field that not only advocated my drinking and partying, but seemed to encourage it. Misery loves company. So throughout my high school career, as you can imagine, if you're partying and drinking on the weekend, you get hungry, right? And so nobody knew how to cook. And I had a mom who was a bang-up cook. She was really, really good. And so she would teach me how to cook. And so ultimately, I just became the party cook. And so when I decided I wasn't going to go to Georgetown, some guys were like, "Hey, man, you should be a chef." And for some reason, I just thought that was a great idea. And so instead of taking this scholarship that I'd earned, I went ahead and went to culinary school, and I became a chef. And I entered into a field, like I said, that not only advocated drinking and partying, but it seemed to encourage it. And, you know, misery loves company. And
on the job as well.
Oh, yeah, a little wine for the pan, and a little, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was kind of a nonstop, you know, dysfunctional party, and just kind of a dysfunctional family. I mean, we felt like we were family. It was a great career, but a very hard one for a fledgling alcoholic. And then at that point, I had no academics, no athletics, nothing to really keep me in check or in line that I was really seeking to be good at. And so I was just left with this career that I didn't necessarily want. I was just kind of not pushed into, but had some people kind of steer me that direction. But I was never necessarily passionate about being a chef. I was just good at it.
Coming into, you said at 26 you had this encounter with God. Kind of go through what that looked like. Did you come to a point of brokenness where you were kind of trying to find yourself? And with this career, you said that you didn't really feel like that was where your whole life, your trajectory, kind of you know, you're going through athletics and you kind of just take this turn. Yeah. What did that look like for you, your encounter with God?
Yeah. So after high school and then going to college, becoming a chef, and then entering into that vocation, as I said, I didn't really have anything, no aspirations at that point, really. You know, it's just, okay, I'm in the workforce. I have a career that is fun, but it wasn't really something I was passionate about. And I do believe that God early on had really shown me something inside of me that he had placed inside of me. But again, I had nobody to cultivate that at all up to that point. I was always kind of an individual that people would just kind of dump their problems on, even as a child, which is really weird when you're a kid and you have adults kind of using you as a sounding board. But I had nobody to really help me understand what that was, and I know now what that is, and that's something that God put inside of me, and he was going to utilize that in the future. But I didn't know that then, so it was more of a burden. So, again, I'm working as a chef, ultimately became a private chef, worked out in Bel Air and some different areas of Houston, but I had nothing other than job and partying. And by this time, I had already started using drugs as well. So it wasn't just the alcohol. And then that really accelerated me getting into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, what kind of drugs were you using?
Well, it was funny because I never touched a drug in high school at all. I was kind of the guy like, oh, drugs are bad, you know. Now, I'd drink until I couldn't see straight, but I wouldn't do drugs, you know, and I had a lot of friends that were doing them, but I thought it was just the worst thing to get involved with. And so it wasn't until the day I graduated, I ended up taking acid for the first time. So I went from just drinking a whole lot to just ramping it right up, and then going into psychedelics, and then ultimately being in the world of culinary arts. Cocaine was everywhere. We used it to stay up. We used it to work crazy long hours, and it just became a regular part of our day. That's just what we did, you know. We drank, we used cocaine, we drank to go down, and cocaine to come back up. So it became a pretty frequent thing for me.
Riding the elevator is never no good, man. Like,
No.
It doesn't end well for most, you know?
No, even as a young man, it was hard to keep up with that pace, you know, working crazy hours and being up 1 minute, down the next minute. And then ultimately, as I said, it led to legal troubles. It started out with some small stuff, just, you know, public intoxication, just stupid things, being out, walking the streets in Houston, you know, coming from bars, little things like that. And then coming home from Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, I got my first DWI. And that was kind of a wake-up call. And, like, you know, I wake up and I'm in Harris County, and I've never been in major trouble. I mean, like, even when I got my PIs, they were like, we were cutting up in the jail. You know, they just kind of slap you on the wrist and then send you home. It was more of a joke. But this wasn't a joke. You know, I woke up, and I was in a place that I never thought I would be. And I didn't feel, truth be told, like I belonged there. You know, I'm not this guy that's you know, getting in trouble, belonging in jail. So I cleaned myself up for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I thought, okay, I got myself straight. And then I got invited out for a night of fun, and I got my second DWI within a month. And so I got back-to-back DWI, saw the same judge in Harris County, and they were ready to throw the book at me. And I just happened to have a career that had made enough money to hire the right lawyer, and ended up, again, kind of getting out of some trouble that should have been, sending me to jail, to state jail probably. And when I went to Harris County and I stayed there for about 30 days, which is all I got, again, another slap on the wrist. I was in there with guys who had the same charges as me, but were going up for, 120 plus days going to state jail for the same thing that I just kind of bought my way out of with a good lawyer.
Right.
Truth be told. And so,
isn't it funny how money can protect you from some consequences sometimes? Like in the natural, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was, again, that kind of set me up for failure. I thought that, here, I've got this career, I'm making some money, I can kind of buy myself out of my trouble now. So why would I stop doing what I'm doing? I was just kind of brushing up against the law, and it almost kind of not gave me a feeling of invincibility, but it made me feel like I was alive to some degree. I was actually doing something that, I don't know, that, I was getting away with. People almost like revered that in my social circle. It was revered that they had to pick me up from county a couple times, and we went and partied right after that. And obviously, who you surround yourself with is important. So.
Yeah, you start getting some clout. You start thinking you're Teflon, and things just slide off the back.
Oh,
take
absolutely.
A couple shots, think you're Tupac.
Yeah. So. A couple more years went by, and again, nothing really changed for me. I mean, the partying got harder. The drugs, they were just readily available, and ultimately, I'd become pretty miserable in my life. I had nothing really that I was living for other than to party and go to work, and that was a pretty miserable existence. And I had been out in Clear Lake and was again partying and drinking, and I got into a pretty bad accident. And I ran into the back of a truck and totaled out my vehicle, shot out of the car, thinking I was going to run away from this again. I'm going to get away and get out of this. And next thing I know, I was tackled by a cop, and I remember waking up again the next day in the drunk tank, having to question my life's choices. Yeah. And I thought for sure, now I'm going to prison. This is going to be third DWI. There's no way they're not going to give that to me. The guy that was actually checking me out and getting ready for transport to go back to Harris County was the arresting officer. He started asking me all these questions. He said, "Hey, man, so how drunk were you last night?" And me, like, I'm going to play it off with this guy. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't drinking at all. And, he's like, "Look, man, I'm the one that arrested you. If I wanted to give you your third DWI, I would have done it." I was kind of taken aback on that. And I thought, for sure, I'm going to prison. And he said, "Look, I had to arrest you for something. So I arrested you for driving with a suspended license. I didn't feel like it was time. Something told me not to give you your third DWI." And so I had just gotten my license back, believe it or not, and there was a glitch in the system in Austin that showed him that I had not, and I was driving on a suspended license from my previous DWIs. And anyway, so he had to take me to county. I go to Harris, sit there for a few days. They call me in. The judge sees me, and hey, "I'm sorry, Mr. Campbell. I apologize. We're going to give you time served, and then we're also going to give you credit for the next time you come. There was a glitch in the system." So, again, I should have had another DWI. I should have really, I should have been going to prison, really. I mean, because I hadn't changed my lifestyle one bit. I was still drinking and driving every single day.
Yeah.
But you would have thought that would have spurred me on. But this time I was pretty scared. I was scared because I woke up in a place that I don't even remember getting to. I was scared because I do remember hitting a vehicle, and I thought, man, I could have killed someone. And I didn't know what happened until later on, and I did get in contact with the gentleman that I hit. Turns out that he had a big truck, and all I did was ricochet off of him and didn't hurt or harm anyone, but it could have ended a lot worse. And that was kind of my major wake-up call, and that was when I knew it was time to do something. But at that point, I didn't really have any idea of what to do, and again, had no church family. My mom was grasping at strands at that point. We had tried AA and been to those meetings a couple times, but I thought it wasn't for me. All these people are just broken down, and but that was just me being young and stubborn. So, but it was at that time that a family friend mentioned a place in Liberty, Texas called Shiloh Men's Ministries, It was a year-long in-house life restoration center. It was a faith-based facility for men that were struggling with drug and alcohol addiction. I knew I needed to do something, but naturally I was resistant to going and turning my life over for a year to some place that I'd never been before, and I'd never been to rehab or anything like that up to this point. So I was, I was pretty nervous about changing or uprooting my whole life, and this was around 25 years old, 25, 26. So.
Yeah. And what did it for you? Did you end up going to this men's home?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of that accident, and then the fact that I didn't stop doing drugs even after that. I didn't stop drinking. I'd slowed down a little bit just to try to stay out of major trouble, but I mean, I was still doing the same things, and so I found myself right back into that same pattern. Even though I'd kind of slowed down, tried not to go, do all the things that we read about in the big book, and we read about trying to temper our addiction with different habits and patterns and practices without actually eradicating the addiction or eradicating the behavior. And I just finally had a conversation with my mom, and I was so miserable in my life that I just knew I had to do something. C.S. Lewis, my favorite quote, says, "Pain is God's megaphone." And I didn't know it was God calling out to me at that point in my life, but I know now it was. I'd finally had enough pain and misery and just feelings of being lost that I was willing to do anything. I didn't really want to go, but I was willing to go. And that's where my life took just a massive change.
So you decided to, you became willing to go to Shiloh. You gave yourself a year. Did you stay the whole year there? What was that like?
Yeah, I did. It was crazy at first because, again, I hadn't been really inundated with church, especially in a long time. And this was a very charismatic place. And so, day one, I'm going into this group of guys, praise and worship. They're dancing around, hands are in the air, singing, and just full of something that I'd never witnessed or experienced. And here I'm this broken guy that's come in day one, and I'm just sitting back full of pride saying, man, these people are nuts. They're crazy.
Who are these nut jobs?
Yeah, man. And I thought I had it all together, and I thought they all were wrong, and it was just, it was funny. And so I was very resistant for the first week or two. And I just remember sitting in the back, naturally where you sit when you feel inadequate to be in a place or like you don't belong, and just watching these people dance and sing, and just, they had something, man. And we reflect God's glory, and I think that is exactly what I was seeing on these individuals. Like, they were reflecting God's glory, and it was just, it was attractive to me, but I was afraid. I was afraid to look stupid. I was afraid to, to let my guard down and be fake or be something that I wasn't. And about 2 weeks in, I just remember kind of inching my hand up, and that was it for me. From that point on, I felt the presence of God like I'd never felt before, and it kind of like instantly transported me back to when I was 8 years old, and that drawing. And so then all those dots were connected from a very young age, seeing some things that had transpired when I was a youth, but not really knowing how to grapple with that or understand it, having nobody to cultivate it. It all kind of came flooding into that moment. And then I just pressed in. I mean, anything they told me to do, I said, I'm going to do it. We had really good teachers at that facility, really poured over the word, and I love to learn. And so it really appealed to me. So it was huge.
That what you were saying about, just lifting up your hand a little bit, that's all God needs from us, just one act of surrenderance. It's like when you raise your hands in church, or you say stop, the cops, you're raising your hands and you're saying, hey, I give up. And when we do that, it's symbolic in a way that we're saying, hey, we're surrendering our life. And though it was just God can work with what you have. And, so just hearing that.
It reminds me of the story of the prodigal son. Like, as soon as he was in that muck and the mire with the pig, he said, man, I need to go back to my dad's. And he just takes a step. Yeah. The father's looking for him. As soon as he sees him coming, he runs out to meet him. And God just needs a little bit. He needs a little bit, and he'll come make up the rest of the way. So,
like I said, shortly after arriving and kind of starting to assimilate a little bit and just starting to feel the presence of God, and I I was sold out, and again, I had some really, really good people that were in my life at that time. The two individuals that ran the facility were just warm and caring. I mean, just grace and mercy, dripping all over them. And I think that was another attractive thing to me, that it didn't matter how upset or how angry I would get, or the things that I would vocalize to them, how frustrated or how much I'd, said that I didn't understand. They were so patient and kind with me, and that just, to me, spoke volumes. And he too was a recovered heroin addict. I mean, had some pretty major stuff that he went through, prison time and everything, and you wouldn't be able to tell, And so just seeing a life changed, that was motivation enough for me to stick it out and stay the year. And then it wasn't too long after I'd gotten in there and started to see, God showing me that my life was going to absolutely take a different path, and it wasn't going to be in culinary arts or anything that I ever thought that it would be. And that's where I first got my calling, but assignment, if you will. And he said, "Man, you're going to stay here and you're going to help." And so I just did anything that they asked me to try to work towards being considered to stay on board after graduation and do whatever they needed me to do. And so that's what I did. I graduated the program. They asked me to stay on board and kind of help as a supplemental resident advisor. So I stayed there. I'd come on the weekends and give the weekly resident advisors a break. So I'd go back, and I moved out to move right back in. And then all the while I also got a job at our local, or what was our home church for that ministry. They went to a local church there in Mont Bellevue. And so I was kind of pulling double duty there. And again, my life was just different, it's seemingly almost overnight.
So you graduated Shiloh. You're there for a year. You're coming back as a part-time staff member. You feel this call of God. Like, where does that go from there, Jeremiah?
Yeah. So, ultimately, I worked with Shiloh for another year or so until the job requirements at Maranatha Church, is the church I was working at, just became too much to try to do both. And so I'd stepped away. I'd volunteer from time to time at Shiloh, still very closely connected. But also all the while I had met a woman in the church, and, thought, this is it. God brought me this woman, it was pastor's daughter and music minister's daughter, just the dream. Right. And so ultimately we ended up getting married, and I was still working as a minister at the time. They were wanting to transition me into youth ministry because I'd been working a lot with their youth. But there was a lot of talks between her and I that ministers just don't make enough money, And looking back, I see that as my first major compromise, I guess, in what God's assigned me to do. And I just wanted to please her, I wanted to make her happy. She was my wife, and we lived in a very materialistic area. Everybody worked for the chemical plants. There was major chemical plants around, Exxon, Bayer, all these other, plants. And ultimately I said, I would do what I never wanted to do, and that was go and kind of follow in my dad's footsteps and work in the chemical plants, because he was miserable, All he did was go to work, sleep, go to work, sleep, and then eventually you would have some time off, but then he would just, go sit in the woods and hunt and fish, and so for me, I didn't really want that lifestyle. That was not appealing to me. But I went ahead and did it because I wanted to make her happy. And I remember distinctly my first week or so in the job, I became an operator, started working for Bayer, and just the noise that the turnstile made, it just felt like jail every time that thing would turn and click, and it was just miserable. I mean, the job was great, don't get me wrong. The chemistry, the science behind what I was doing, it was very intriguing. But after all that goes away and you're just running an operation, you're just going through a loud turnstile for 16 plus hours a day, and then wash, rinse, repeat. And I was miserable. Yeah. And so I was kind of back to that point in my life, though I wasn't drinking necessarily. I was back to that point in my life where I was not content with my life. I knew something was off. There was a misalignment. Ryan and I were talking about that earlier. There was a misalignment. So I was frustrated due to that misalignment in my life. And it was because I stepped away from what God had assigned me to do. and ultimately we ended up going probably the best vacation that a previous alcoholic could go to. We went to New Orleans, and we hung out on Bourbon Street, not with the intent to go party or drink, but she wanted to go, never been, and I just remember that was the first compromise that I made in that relationship, and she was reminiscing about a drink that she had in college, and I started thinking, man, a beer would be good.
Yeah.
And then I relapsed after years of not touching, alcohol or drugs. And she was not one that was affected by drugs and alcohol in that way. She was able to drink a little bit, quit, never needed to touch it again. It reignited something in me that at that point I'd convinced myself that I was free from. I thought everything that I was doing that led up to me going to Shiloh was circumstantial. Everybody around me drank to excess. Everybody around me did drugs. That was normal, so I was only following the norm. So I probably am not somebody that's affected by drugs and alcohol in the same way. I could probably have a beer, and I was wrong, And
I keep thinking, the big book says that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
And I just think that those words just came to my mind when you're like, how it will convince us that we're okay. Yeah. You're not. Those are all just aberrations. That's not really who you are. Yeah. You got it this time. You can control it.
Yeah, and it's also important, like what I tell when I'm working with men that are coming from addiction, is all it takes is one. Mm. I'm just going to do this one time, and that's going to be it. And that's all it needs. And then, next thing you know, they're back in bondage. So
isn't it funny how you were saying all God needs is a little bit from you, and he can come the other way, but it's how this stuff is too. All it needs is a foot in the door.
And the door open, yeah.
Yep. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. So, New Orleans, Bourbon Street, yeah.
Yeah.
The giant gets awakened.
Oh, yeah. The sleeping giant was definitely awake.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and again.
Now you're married. You have kids?
No, we had no children. We were newlyweds. So this wasn't. We weren't very far into our relationship as far as marriage is concerned, and so this, the sleeping giant was awoken, and we get back in town, and I just remember thinking that I can have this life. I can drink, and we can hang out on the weekends with friends, and we can make margaritas and sit out on the patio and do, kind of what I had envisioned earlier in life as this perfect life, make a lot of money, big house, white picket fence, 2.5 kids, great wife, and then, just live what was presented by the world as a normal life. And I think that that's the thing too. There's such a misconception that's presented to us, especially in America, as what a normal life is. And alcohol, for some reason, is normalized in that. It's projected, it's commercialized, it's normalized as if you're living a normal American life, then you're going to have a beer on the weekend, or you're going to, and it's weird how I envisioned, and it was so ingrained in me that, and like you said, cunning, baffling, powerful. I like to say that your mind is smart enough to manipulate itself, just not smart enough to realize it's been manipulated. Well, that's what happened to me. I had convinced myself before I took that first drink that everything was going to be okay, and I'm going to live the normal life that America told me that I was going to have. But that wasn't what happened. I was miserable in my job already prior, and so I just started basically working and drinking. And as you can imagine, that built a lot of tension in our relationship. To the point where she finally said that she didn't want to be in the relationship anymore. And I said that I didn't want to work in that field anymore. It wasn't what I wanted to do to begin with, and I resented her, I believe, for that, pushing me into something when really I knew the assignment that God had given me. I knew what he wanted me to do, and I stepped away for her. And so there was a resentment from both sides, and it ultimately led to a divorce shortly after we started, our relationship. So we made it about a year.
So after you got divorced, did you stop using at that point, or did it steamroll, or like what happened then?
No, it was game on, because I was in my mind, I'm free from this person who pushed me into all these things that I didn't want to do, led me down a path that I didn't really want to go, and so I spent the next year trudging through what became an even worse addiction than it was before I went to Shiloh. Because at that point, not only was I miserable in my job, but my usage and my finances were even greater, believe it or not, than before that. I mean, working in the chemical plants, it was very, very lucrative. So I had a lot of money to blow on. Back again, cocaine came right back into the picture.
Yeah, hookers
shortly
and blow.
after all of it. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's.
We know what
I mean,
it's like, man.
Hey, look,
We know what it's like.
Yeah, the thing that you were doing before, it's not like that just left your mind and it was completely eradicated and you hit the reset button on your addiction and went into something different. All those things that you dabbled with, all the things that what you thought was fun, had fun in, came rushing back in. The difference in this situation was I was saved and I was born from above. I knew that I had a relationship with Christ, but at the moment I wasn't living that way and I wasn't having fun. I was absolutely miserable. But what that was causing me to do is try to drink more and use more to try to suppress those feelings because I didn't really know what else to do at that point. I had a failed marriage. My life, in my opinion, was back in disrepair. And I didn't really have a lot of people around me. Again, she was a member of the church that we had attended. So when we divorced, they had to take sides essentially. And so for me, I was kind of cast out because I was the drunk. I was the one that was causing all the problems, despite what the issues really were with our relationship. And so I didn't really have anybody again. So I had no community other than the people that I had met back drinking and drugging, which those guys aren't really there to try to build me up and help me to get out of this pit that I dug myself back in.
And they'll always take you back.
Oh man,
they'll always take you back.
Well, especially a guy who had money, that was funding everything. They took me back every week. Yeah, and so for a year, I spent that year kind of trudging again back through just that mess, but even more miserable than before because back before I was saved, sin was fun for a time. I didn't really view it as sin. I didn't view it as something that was a major hindrance or something that was going to, keep me from this relationship that I had started to develop. At this point, that's exactly what I was experiencing, and it was horrible. And so that culminated with me getting into another accident and again trying to bolt from the accident or the scene of the accident because I still knew that I was within a certain amount of years I'm probably going to get another DWI. They didn't charge me with a DWI. They just charged me from a failure to give identification or something along those lines. It was something small, but that was another wake-up call for me, and I decided that I needed to quit. And so at that point, I moved up to Livingston where my parents had retired to just get a fresh start, got away from everything. And then after that, I had some friends that were in a town called Lufkin that was a little bit north of Livingston. And I heard of this ministry that was like Shiloh that had just gotten started. So I ended up moving up there, kind of dipping my toe in the water, working with this ministry called the Dream Center that had just been started in Lufkin. And it was in its infancy. There wasn't really any meat on the bone, so to speak, of this program. There was a few people there. It was a program that had men and women. They had 81 acres of property, but they didn't really have a ton of structure. And I'd already kind of had exposure to a ministry that was highly structured. And so I kind of used some of that expertise to go in and just start, for whatever reason, I know now, it was God that was opening that door. They allowed me to start coming in and writing procedures and policy for this place, which ultimately led to me marketing for them because I had no real marketing at the time. Nobody really knew that they existed. They were off in the woods. And ultimately it led to me becoming a leader over the men's house. And then ultimately they offered me the job as executive director. And so it was very rapid how things progressed and where I thought I was done, the story of my life was done. God didn't like the way it was unfolding, and he was writing it, and the character development wasn't great, wadding me up and throwing me in the trash. He didn't do that. I think that a lot of times those gifting and callings are irrevocable. Now we can do things that can damage that, hinder it, prevent it from happening the way that he originally designed. However, he's sovereign, so he knew what was going to happen to begin with, but he still used me, and that was huge.
The only way you're disqualified is if you disqualify yourself,
Sure.
And a righteous man stumbles, but he gets up, right? And so,
yeah, that kind of reminds me of, he mentioned earlier the prodigal son, but it brings it back, he realized that, hey, in my father's house, there's blessings, and you kind of like remember something brought you back to that same type of ministry, that recovery center, right?
Yeah.
You're like, man, when I was there, it was like I was in a good point in my life, and it's beneficial to serve God, you know, because the Bible says the way of the transgressor is hard, and sometimes, you know, you see it all the time when people you're trying to help, they're not done hurting themselves, bumping their head. They still got to go out there and kind of make a mess of their life. And unfortunately, that's a point some people have to come to before they realize, hey, you know, God has, you know, it's everything I have is yours. He told his son, you know, and there's blessings that God has for you. So it's just remind me of that story. You know, he came to a point where, you know, he's in a pig pen. The prodigal son, he left his father's house, and he's in a pig pen. He done squandered all his inheritance, the Bible says, on drunkenness and prostitutes. And he comes to a point in his life where he's like, man, if I just return back to it, the servants have it better. You know, he even the servants have it better. So just, you know, realizing that the life that you were living is kind of, you know, leading you in a path that it's a hard life, you know. And so just seeing that correlation there between the prodigal son.
Yeah, I also think it just brings the reality of this thing we battle in recovery too. Is you know, recovery is an ongoing process, but I think failure is built into it. You know, and there's very few people that I know that got sober the very first time and stayed sober. You know, it's a
rarity. Yeah.
It's a rarity. But it is, if you keep getting back on the horse, if you keep getting back on the wagon, if you keep working, no matter how many times you fall, that like your odds get better. You do get longer periods of sobriety. So, you know, so you're in Lufkin, you're running the Dream Center, doing all those things. Obviously, what year was that? How long ago was that when that started?
That started in about 2012.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 2012, we're in 2025 today. You know, you come out to Brookshire, you're out there with us at the Manor House doing very similar things. Fill in that gap a little bit between those times. Like, how did you get out to us? Take us from the Dream Center to Brookshire and in between. I know that's a
Dream Center. It was a pretty major operation, given that it was 81 acres of property. The original founders, they purchased the property that nothing was given to them. So there was a very large mortgage. Operation was about $36,000 a month to just try to keep the doors open at this place. And that all kind of fell on my shoulders in a town of about 32,000 people.
I would love to have that budget. Just saying.
Yeah, no. That's what it cost. That wasn't what I had. So there was the disconnect, right? And so I'm trying to go and find that much money. It was very difficult. And by this time, the founders had kind of grown weary of really wanting to do anything with the ministry at all. And they were like, okay, here, it's yours, but here's your board that you didn't choose. Anyway, I won't go into the details in that. But there was a lot of red tape and muddy waters as it pertained to that ministry. And the ministry itself was great, and the culture was very good. But some bureaucracy and some things that you have to naturally deal with, it was very difficult. And ultimately, a decision was made by the board to shut the doors. And so there was a natural grieving process for me and all my, not only my staff, but I had residents. I had male and female residents. We had quite a few residents at that point, over 30.
Unexpectedly, or was there talks?
I mean, when you're having to go get, the rent, so to speak, every single month, there's always the talk of, maybe that we just can't do this anymore. Maybe this is not sustainable. Maybe we should consider shutting down, scaling back, or whatever. But I'd always trusted and believed that we were going to be able to maintain and keep running, and that the funds were going to come in. And they were, but I think it almost felt like I was being handed something a little bit too late in the game to really come in and start trying to develop the relationships that I needed to develop as the executive director to try to keep the ball rolling forward. Especially with the founders still in the picture. And again, this is not not bashing them at all. They were wonderful people, and they did a great job there. And there's still sober people to this day that I'm in contact with because of that place. There are men and women who reach out to me to this day still, because I haven't changed my phone number, that are still doing very well. So if they impacted one person, you know, it was worth it,
Absolutely.
I believe. And so I look at it like that. But that being said, it was a hard time in my life because I had 15 employees and then roughly 30 residents that I had to relocate residents. Some of them naturally use this as a way to leave the ministry and not complete anything. Yeah. Went back to using, and I held that over me for a while. You know, I thought, gosh, that's on me. When that was their decision, I was partnered with a couple other places, Shallow Men's Ministry being one of them. I could have gotten them into some other ministries. Some of them chose not to do that. But then also, you know, looking at my staff and just telling my staff, hey, I don't have a paycheck for you at the end of the year. You know, we closed Jan 1, and that was it, you know. And so that was a very hard time. And so I kind of was going through a little bit of an identity crisis. You know, God, I believe you brought me here. I mean, this was definitely a catalyst for change again in my life. And then here I am having to close this chapter on my life. What do I do? I was given some really great opportunities after that. Our home church was going multi-site, and the pastors were tapping me to open the first multi-site of this of our church. We were going to open our second location in Nacogdoches from Lufkin. We'd gone through a name change and all the things that you go through when you're starting to go to multi-site. I did all the research to start to develop and create a second site for a church. And so I'd all but signed on the dotted line to become the campus pastor of that first site. And I had somebody in town that was on my board that came to me and said, hey, the Boys and Girls Club, they've got a couple pretty major black eyes, and they're really waning on attendance, and we really need somebody to revitalize that ministry, or it wasn't a ministry, it was an organization. I said, man, I don't know anything about the Boys and Girls Club at all. I'd never been affiliated with the Boys and Girls Club. I was not a club kid growing up. But out of respect for this guy, I said, I'm going to take that meeting for you. I went in there, and about as soon as I walked through the door, I heard God spoke to me. He said, this is where you're going to be. Again, I'm arguing with God. I'm like, I don't know anything about this. But then I was recalling all the experience that I really had helping my mom with this babysitting career that she had and made, and all these kids that went through our house for years. And so I took that job, you know, called the pastor and said, I know you're not going to believe this, but I'm taking a different job. And it was a wonderful time in my life. So at that point in time, I'd remarried, met her at the Dream Center. She worked for us at the Dream Center. I'd remarried. We had, in response to wanting to create a women's and children's portion of that ministry at the Dream Center before it closed down, we started going through the foster care system to try to get involved, to understand what it would be like. And so in doing so, we ended up fostering quite a few children. Ultimately, we ended up with 4 children that came up for adoption, and we ended up, during this period of time, adopting 4 children. And then when we were about to adopt the last one, about to sign on the dotted line for this last child, we found out she was pregnant. So in a matter of a very short amount of time, we went from just having some foster children, not really any expectation to have children or anything anytime soon, to adopting 4 and about to have 1 biological. So our life had changed drastically in a short amount of time. And then all the while we were doing a lot of work to try to build up that Boys and Girls Club in town. And then it went so well that we ended up replicating what we were doing at a couple other sites. They had 10 different locations within Deep East Texas Boys and Girls Club. So we started replicating. We got our census from about 50 or 60 that we could track just by who would come daily, because there was no digital tracking system, which we did put in place, to over 400 kids a day at the Boys and Girls Club at the Lufkin location. But again, I kind of came to a fork in the road with working a lot. The club was open till 7 p.m. Most of the time I wasn't getting home till 9:30, because we dealt with a lot of kids that parents weren't really in the picture very, very much. Wouldn't pick them up on time, wouldn't pick them up at all. Had to wait around, try to call relatives to come get them. So many nights I'm getting home late. And at this point, we've got 4 young kids that we've adopted and 1 on the way. and I had to make a decision. And I was asked to go and take over a managerial position at a dealership in town. So again, I was at that fork in the road of deciding to stay in, and I considered the Boys and Girls Club ministry, even though it's not
Absolutely.
not deemed that. It's secular in nature to some degree, but I treated it as a ministry. We talked to those kids about God, and we had pastors come in. We really had a lot of programming, and nobody, thankfully, shut that down, that exposed these kids to Christ and the love of Christ. And then we had meetings with my staff. So I'm at what I'm considering a ministry, and I'm at that fork in the road, and I have to decide, do I leave this and then go work in a secular job again as a means to, better support my family financially, because I wasn't making a lot of money at the Boys and Girls Club, and then be home at regular hours. So I don't believe that I truly consulted God the way I should have, and I chose to go and work that secular job. And I do believe that wasn't the right decision in my life. And then again, it set that same cycle as before with going and working at the chemical plant, to where I was just discontented. I wasn't happy with what I was doing. I didn't enjoy the job. And so ultimately, that one compromise led to more compromises in my life. Things that I would have normally done. I started to just compromise in and let those things taper off. Quiet time with God, seeking Him on all my decisions, especially the big one like leaving. And that ultimately led to COVID hitting, church shutting down, difficulties with the job, and we both started drinking. And so again, after almost 10 years of abstaining from the thing that had almost killed me a couple times, I was back at it again. And so ultimately, that relapse led to another divorce, another relocation, and God again was merciful. After about a year again of trudging through the pain, and even more pain this time, because I'd lost a wife, I'd lost a church family all at the same time. I'd lost my kids at that point because of my drinking. I looked up and said, God, I need your help. And He was right there. And He led me to this other ministry, which was another Dream Center in Beaumont. Stayed there for a little bit, trying to collect myself, just trying to trust that God was going to do something with my brokenness yet again, and got hooked up with a guy who happened to be on the board of the Manor House. And just through our conversations, he said, man, I want you to come check this place out and consider taking an interview there. And I said, man, I don't know that God can use me again. I don't know that He can use me for any of that. Who am I going to help? I failed twice in the same way. And he said, no, I think you need to come take this meeting. And as soon as my wheels hit the rocks, because there's rocks everywhere at the Manor House, as soon as my wheels hit the rocks, I knew that I was in the right place. And I didn't care what they offered me. I didn't care what the pay was. I knew that was where I was supposed to be. And so just accepted the job that night, and kind of the rest is history. So.
Yeah, so, we see the faithfulness of God in your life through, the fall, the get up, the God of restoration. He brings you to Manor House. That's where you're supposed to be. Tell us what that's been like since, and how long you've been there and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so after a failure, you're naturally grappling with identity issues, with a sense of self-worth. How in the world is God going to use me when I've actively made the same mistake twice? Really, and so I was really struggling with that. But I do believe, and at that point, before I left the Dream Center in Beaumont, they'd offered me a couple positions there, one of them being an executive director position, believe it or not. They were wanting to transition away from leadership, and obviously I prayed about that. And all the while I had this Manor House, which I'd never seen before. I didn't go on the internet. I didn't look at it. I knew nothing about it other than it was in Brookshire, Texas, and it was a place that we drove by.
There wouldn't have been much on the internet.
Yeah, not at that time.
Yeah, not at that time.
Well, I tried. After when I decided, but for me, I knew that Beaumont was not it. And after talks with that board member, I just prayed and prayed. And one day I woke up and I knew God had told me, hey, it's time. And I didn't even know that I was going to have a job. There was nothing guaranteed in that, but I knew it was time. So packed my stuff and I left that place in Beaumont. And then the next day I came up to Brookshire and took an interview. They were having a board meeting that night. And again, as soon as my wheels hit those rocks, God was like, this is it. It doesn't matter what they offer you. You're going to take it. And he also told me something else, because again, I was dealing with this major identity crisis. I had been an executive director before and had whatever roles and titles, in previous ministries and organizations. And he gave me one word. And I'm not a sailor, so I didn't really, I've heard the word helmsman before. I've heard, that word. I know somewhat what it meant. But I went and I Googled that. And he said, it's not the one that sets the heading, but it's the one who gets the blisters and the splinters. He holds the heading for the one that's in charge, the one setting it. And so I looked at that, and then I looked at what they offered me, and I said, okay, this is it, God. You're giving me a chance,
It wasn't much.
Well, no, the number, again, man, it wasn't even the number. It was just like when I was finally ready to do something again and knew that I needed to reach out to God. I'm telling you, I was sitting there in my misery, I was sitting there in my brokenness, and I finally looked up, and it's like he was hovering over me right there, and he's just like, all right, let's go to work. And he'd been there the whole time. It was me that had that crisis of identity. It was me that didn't feel worthy of his love and his grace and his mercy in my life. But as soon as I just was so sick of being in that and knew that I didn't want to die in my addiction. I didn't want to leave my kids, with that legacy. God was right there, and he met me there, and he just systematically started doing things in my life and putting things before me. And it was just... It was unmistakable, and it was unmistakable that his words were so clear in this. And again, the Manor House, everything that's happened and transpired since I've gotten there, Ryan and I didn't know each other from Adam, and just the way that we've, ended up connecting and everything. It's just been one God encounter after another. And he's doing some really neat things at the Manor House. And I just thank God every day for being a part of it.
Reminds me of the scripture that says, God's mercy is new every day.
Yeah.
Some people think we just need God's mercy once, but it's like every day we need God's mercy.
Yeah.
And the scripture says that the goodness of God calls men to repentance. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we might see God like out of fear, maybe, as you said, because of your addiction. You're like, hey, if I don't fix this, I might end up in jail. I might end up hurting somebody. But it's like then you fall back. And it's like we see that God's mercy, he's still willing to reinstate you, just like the prodigal son. That theme just keeps coming up. He just repositions you right where you were before you left. And it's like, man, you realize that God's goodness and his mercy is like, it's that goodness of God that calls us to repentance, that even though we fell, even though we made mistakes, that God is still right there, willing to put us back in the position that we're in. And maybe somebody out there, you hear Jeremiah's story and you're like, man, you might have really made a mess of things and mess of your life. These stories of hope and redemption, show that God's mercy is renewed every day. We need this not because we have it all together. We don't go to meetings, go to church and fellowship and have community because we have it all together. On the contrary, we do this because we don't have it all together. We're trying to hold it together, and we know that we need God. Yeah. We need his strength. We need renewance. We need fellowship. And just remember that, if you're making a mess, you fall down. The Bible says a righteous man falls 7 times, but he rises up again. Mm-hmm. And God is willing to reinstate you in the position that you were before. Yes, there's going to be some discipleship and some discipline and things that come along with that, but God's mercy is renewed every day, and you never stray too far from the Father's house that he won't receive you.
Yeah, man. And I just think about all those things God has done in your life. Like, he doesn't waste a thing. From the moment you were young, with your mom, with the daycare, with the encounter with God at 8, with everything along the way, with you writing policies and procedures for another organization, when you having to do all this stuff, working with young people, all this stuff is kind of mirroring, is getting you ready for a time like this. And the thing I keep thinking about, in addition to the prodigal son, and I use it all the time, and this is for anybody out there, Peter told Jesus, like, man, Lord, I'll never leave you. I'll never abandon you, you know? And this is the night before he goes to the cross, and he says, Peter, he goes, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat. And he goes, well, first of all, he tells him, before the cock crows in the morning, you'll have denied me 3 times, right? He said, man, you think you got it all together, but just before sunup, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he goes, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you. And he goes, and when you return, strengthen your brothers. And I just think it's one of the most powerful moments in the Bible, that Jesus knows us so intimately and deeply that he knows that Peter's going to fall, and that he's going to repent and turn, and God is going to restore him so much. He knows him so intimately, and he's so confident in that fact that he gives him instruction for what to do after he restores him. Yeah. And it's just like one of the most powerful things in the Bible to me. And so I would say today, Jeremiah, man, I'm so glad you're on board, dude. I love you, man. And like, we couldn't do what's going on. This guy's the glue. He is the ultimate glue guy, man. He is. That helmsman word is very powerful. He's. I'm not an organized person. I'm kind of high level vision, dude. And he is the one getting the splinters in his hands. He's in the one with his hands in the dirt. And man, I'm proud of what God's done with you there. I'm proud of what you've allowed him to do in your life. Just seeing you restore your relationship with your kids, great relationship, with your ex-wife, working together to co-parent, all those great things. Through a lot of tough circumstances and tough conversations, and I've just seen you wade through it like great. And just like Peter, this is for anybody out there today. Like if you've fallen, I don't care what has happened. I don't care what happened this morning. I don't care if you're shooting up right now. Like, God has got a plan for you. God has got a plan for you, and he is just waiting for you to cry out to him like Jeremiah cried out, and he will set your feet on solid rock. You will have to go through some stuff, like Abel said. You will have to go through some discipline, some discipleship, but God will restore you, and he won't waste a thing. Right. Man, come to him today.
I think what I would say is, it's never too late. It's never too late in life. It's just never too late to come back to God. And again, it's not him that's running away from us or hiding from us or that stepped away. It's always us feeling like he doesn't love us anymore because of what we've done, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Yeah. He's right there telling us to look up. He's right there telling us that I've got you. And he's waiting for us to come back to him. So it doesn't matter what anyone's done or how far they've gone. There's nothing that God can't redeem. And he's a God of restoration. He's done it in my life, and he'll do it in your life too.
Amen. Amen. Praise God. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story.
Man, thank you for having me.
But that wraps up episode 2 of Set Free Podcast. Thank y'all.